Okay, let's unpack this. On September 27, 2025, the president ordered U.S. troops into Portland, Oregon. And the language used describing Portland as war-ravaged. That was, well, immediately shocking. But the real reason we need to dust deep here is the immediate contradiction. Because journalists, residents on the ground, they were seeing something totally different. You know, a placid downtown, farmers markets were packed. People were literally asking, where's the emergency? So our mission today, cut through that. We're looking at the administration's justification, the official story, and comparing it with the facts, the very contested legal grounds, and yeah, the political strategy behind it all.
Right. And what's really fascinating, I think, is just how huge that gap is. The gap between the official line and the actual data. Our sources really break it down meticulously, the directive itself, what was actually happening in Portland, and the whole legal and historical picture for domestic military use. It's not just a small disagreement. It's a fundamental clash, rhetoric versus reality. And the big question, the one Oregon officials asked right away, is basically this. Was this truly necessary? Was there real chaos? Or was it, like Governor Kotek and others said, kind of bait? You know, designed to actually provoke conflict. We need to see what the sources suggest.
Let's start with the order itself. Even how it was announced was, well, unusual. It didn't come through a formal White House channel initially. No, it was a post on Truth Social. And the president wasn't even in D.C. He posted it while he was at his golf club in Virginia, which, you know, suggests a certain level of informality, maybe impulsiveness for such a big decision. The mission stated was to protect this war-ravaged Portland, secure ICE facilities, which he claimed were under siege from Antifa and other domestic terrorists. That phrasing is doing a lot of work there.
It really is. It's trying to reframe the whole thing. Not protests, but terrorism. And then there was that phrase, the authorization for full force if necessary. That was just left hanging there, undefined, which understandably caused huge alarm. Local officials, legal experts, they were immediately worried about what that meant for troops dealing with civilians on U.S. soil. And it seems like even the Pentagon was scrambling. Reports came out saying defense officials knew basically only what the president had just posted online.
Wow.
Yeah, so the political announcement came way before any real policy or military planning.
Okay, so that's the narrative. Portland, a city in chaos needing military rescue. Let's hit it with the reality check, the actual crime stats. How does that hold up?
It doesn't. Not even close. That whole narrative of urban decay, it's just, well, it's refuted by the official data. Our sources point to this big mid-year 2025 report, Major Cities Chiefs Association. And guess what it showed for Portland? The steepest drop in violent crime among all the cities reporting for the first half of the year.
Wait, the steepest drop. So things were actually getting significantly better.
Exactly. Homicides were down something like 51% compared to 2024. Overall violent crime down 17%. And this wasn't secret information. This data was out there, public, weeks before the president's announcement. So there was really no factual basis in the crime data for saying the city was falling apart. And the protests they mentioned, they were very localized, focused on one single U.S. ICE building. It was in a residential area. And reporters kept saying the demonstrations were, you know, smaller scale, more subdued than previous ones. Get this specific detail. On the very day the president made the announcement, journalists counted 4 protesters. Just 4.
4 protesters. And that's the siege needing full force. Okay, so if the facts are so clearly against the rationale, how do they even try to justify it legally? This seems like a huge hurdle.
It is, and that brings us to the legal tightrope act they were performing. You know, the bedrock principle here is the Posse Comitatus Act from 1878. Generally, it says you can't use the active duty military for civilian law enforcement inside the U.S. It's a really old, deep-seated American tradition against having the Army police its own citizens.
Right, but there's the exception presidents sometimes reach for. The Insurrection Act, isn't it?
That's the one, the main exception, the Insurrection Act of 1807. It does let the president send troops domestically, sometimes even if the state doesn't want them, like if federal law isn't being enforced or there's massive unrest. Sections 252, 253, it's the big legal hammer. But here's where it gets, like you said, really interesting. The administration seemed to deliberately avoid naming the Insurrection Act in the Portland order.
Why do that? If you want to send troops, why not use the clearest, if controversial, authority you have?
Well, precisely because it is so controversial. The Insurrection Act is seen by many, many legal scholars as dangerously overbroad and ripe for abuse.
Yeah.
Invoking it triggers instant political and legal firestorms. So what they seem to do instead is what our sources call authority shopping. They look for other, maybe more obscure, legally weaker statutes to try and justify the deployment, hoping it causes less immediate backlash.
Okay. Like finding a loophole, almost?
Sort of. We saw this play out just months before, in June 2025 in Los Angeles. They sent troops there too, but instead of the Insurrection Act, they cited this other law, 10 U.S.C. Section 12406, something about rebellion danger. Governor Newsom immediately sued, and a federal judge actually issued a temporary ruling saying that LA deployment was unlawful, it violated Posse Comitatus.
So Portland wasn't the first test case.
Exactly. Portland looks like the next phase,
Yeah.
testing the boundaries again, using these shifting, unclear legal justifications to see how far they can push before the courts stop them.
So the legal ambiguity isn't accidental. It's part of the strategy, which leads us right into the political why. This wasn't just about Portland, was it? There has to be a pattern.
Oh, absolutely not isolated. When you connect the dots, Portland fits into what the sources describe as a clear pattern, a pattern of interventions, actual troop deployments, or just loud public threats aimed squarely at cities and states run by Democrats. Think Los Angeles, D.C., then threats against Chicago, Baltimore. And the rhetoric is always the same. These places are dangerous, filthy, lawless, and they need the strong hand of the federal government to clean them up. It sets up a really stark political contrast, right? Using federal power almost as a weapon against political opponents, weaponizing federalism itself.
And a key part of making that strategy work seems to be this idea of labeling dissent as terrorism. The deployment came just days after the administration formally designated Antifa as a domestic terrorist organization. Tell us about that designation. What does that achieve?
Well, legally, that designation is on really shaky ground, especially First Amendment-wise. You have legal experts from across the board, even from places like the Libertarian Cato Institute, saying, look, there's no clear constitutional or statutory power for a president to just declare a domestic movement a terrorist group like that. Antifa isn't even a formal organization with members. It's more of a label for certain tactics or ideologies. So designating it raises huge free speech and association questions.
But even if the legality is questionable, it must serve a purpose for them operationally.
Oh, definitely. That's the point. By slapping the domestic terrorist label on protesters, they try to shift the whole legal game. Suddenly, it's not a protest anymore, which is covered by things like the First and Fourth Amendments, civil rights law. No, now it's framed as a national security threat. And if it's national security, well, that's used to argue for bringing in the military, the whole counterterrorism apparatus, against what are essentially domestic political opponents. It's an attempt to bypass Posse Comitatus by redefining the problem.
Okay, to really grasp how significant this is, maybe putting it in historical context helps. We have seen federal troops used domestically before. How does Portland compare to those past instances?
Right, looking back, historical domestic deployments tend to fall into two main buckets, pretty clear ones. First, you have cases of enforcing federal law against states that were defying it. The classic example everyone knows is Eisenhower sending the 101st Airborne to Little Rock in 1957. That was about enforcing desegregation, a federal court order against a governor who refused. The feds were upholding the Constitution. The second category is quelling really massive civil unrest where local police were just totally overwhelmed, like President George H.W. Bush sending troops into the LA riots in '92. But, and this is key, that only happened after California's governor explicitly requested federal help because local capacity had collapsed.
Okay, so enforcing federal law against defiance or helping when local control collapses at the state's request. So what does this all mean for Portland? It sounds like it doesn't fit either of those.
Exactly. Our sources are clear. The Portland deployment fits into neither category. There was no state-defying federal law. In fact, the opposite. And the local authorities, the governor, the mayor, they were publicly insisting, we've got this, we have the resources, we don't want or need federal troops. The intervention was unilateral, unwanted, and based on that questionable narrative of chaos we already discussed.
So this feels like a fundamental shift, a critical inversion, maybe. Historically, the federal government stepped in as the guarantor of order when local systems failed. But here, state officials saw the federal government itself as the potential source of chaos, as a partisan tool to punish enemies.
That inversion is precisely the danger analysts point to. Using the military this way creates a real, tangible risk of violence. Military training is for combat, for decisive force. It's just not suited for the nuances of dealing with civilian protests or law enforcement. And the worry is that the ultimate goal here is normalization through incremental steps, making people used to seeing soldiers on American streets for political reasons, making it seem like just another tool in the president's domestic toolkit. which is why the sources are urgently calling for Congress to step in and reform the Insurrection Act now. They argue reforms need to seriously narrow the criteria, only allow it when there's a proven objective collapse of civilian authority. They need to require Congress to be consulted, maybe even authorize it after a short period, like 7 or 14 days. And, crucially, there needs to be a way for state and local governments to get fast judicial review, to challenge the factual basis in court right away.
Okay, let's wrap this up. A final summary. The Portland deployment in September 2025 seems defined by